Hi, this is Lori Leisure with To the Trade, and I have with me Michael Kessner. Michael, hi, how are you doing?
Hi, good to see you again.
You had a great week?
Yes, doing well, thank
Good.
you.
That's awesome to hear. And our guest today, Carl Dellatore, he is an author. He is an interior design aficionado. He knows everything about design. So we are excited to talk to him about how to get published, what that process looks like, what it's like to write a book. I mean, Carl, you have several books. Tell us from the beginning, how did you even start in this process?
Well, first, thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Thank you.
So I owned a textile brand called CJ Dellatore Textile throughout the 90s and into the early 2000s. And um, so at the same time I was designing textiles and working in that industry, I was writing a column for House Beautiful called Swatch Watch, where we took one piece of white furniture and then upholstered it 9 times in a photo studio over the course of a day or two. And then it was a genre, florals, plaids, red, whatever it is they came up with that month. And it was a big undertaking, but it was super popular. And so they turned it into a book. And then in 2008, as you know, the economy collapsed and things got ugly. And my brand was a casualty of that banking collapse. And so I sort of was tasked with reinvention. And I had never really been to formal design school, even though that's something I really wanted to do. And so I was thinking, I'll go to design school. That's what I'll do. And maybe there's another book. And then, investigating the logistics of going to RISD. And, I was sort of in not the best financial position at that time. I started to think, how could I do this creatively? And then it dawned on me that instead of going to a university setting, what if I went to 100 famous designers and asked them to teach me about one subject in the design discipline and then compile that into a book? And so I wrote the proposal. My literary agent at the time, who shall remain nameless, said, "Oh, no one will buy that. It will take you 10 years to produce that book." And so I sat on it for a while. And then I called my friend Alexa Hampton and I asked her to meet me for coffee. And she said yes. And we did. And I told her about the idea. And she said, "You are exactly the right person to do this. You know everybody already." And so she introduced me to her agent, who signed me. And then the book went into sort of a bidding war with a couple of publishing houses. And I decided to go with Rizzoli.
Ah,
And I landed here. And so
so
that,
exciting. That
yeah,
must
no,
have
it was kind
been.
of it was fun. It was really fun. I mean, going around the country for 2 years talking about scale, proportion, light, color with 100 different designers and then chronicling the experience in a book. And that's how it happened. And then Rizzoli asked me to do 4 more books. So I did Garden Design Masterclass, the same book with 100 gardeners. On Style, which is a book about 50 designers I think represent the next generation of people working in America. And then I most recently published a book called More is More is More about contemporary maximalism.
I love it. I have
And I
all
thought,
of your books. So,
oh, thank you.
yes.
Great. I'm
So,
in the middle
when,
of a new one
yes,
called
I know that is really
100
exciting.
Rooms. Yeah, 100 Rooms, where I'm picking what I think are the 100 most influential rooms in the first quarter century.
Oh,
Right.
wow.
That was a lot of me. Sorry.
That's one. No, I really I love it because I think that people don't necessarily understand what that journey is like. And everybody is sort of different when they get there, but there are a lot of designers that really dream that maybe one day they will, have the status of as an interior designer that a book would be something that they could do.
Yeah,
And now you write books, but you also help designers on that journey is right, correct?
I do. I do. After I got through the first 3 or 4, people began contacting me to talk about how a proposal gets put together, what's necessary for a publishing house to be interested in your idea. And so over the course of time, it's just sort of slowly pivoted to me talking with people about how to put together that proposal, what publishing house are they looking for, what are the numbers involved, economically, what does it really represent? So that's what I've been up to lately.
Oh, that's great. That's great. So let's start at the beginning. Is it proposal before agent or agent before proposal? How does that normally work?
Well, I guess it could come from either direction. I think the most pivotal piece of it all before even thinking about a proposal or getting an agent is platform. Um, You know, I know designers who have 5 or 6 thousand Instagram followers who want to talk about having a book. And one of the first things I say is, you need to work out a strategy to build your audience. Most publishing houses, although it's not a rule anywhere, is 20,000 followers on a platform to begin the conversation. And of course, the higher you get up in the numbers, the more advantageous it is for attracting an agent or a publishing house. I mean, I know designers who have 100,000 followers who are interested in having a book, and that's a much easier conversation to have with an agent or to begin looking at a proposal.
Right, right. And if you don't have those kinds of numbers, I can tell you a friend of mine who is an author. She didn't have her own personal social media numbers, but she started writing for a number of different outlets, and those outlets had great numbers too. So you can kind of like trick the system a little bit sometimes by doing things like that.
Yeah, it's a good strategy.
Yeah,
Yes.
you absolutely can. And in fact, I think I have, I don't know, 4,500 Instagram followers. I'm not that active on that platform, but my books leverage the social media platforms of all the people who are participating in them. And so my books almost unilaterally have either 100 participants or 50 participants. And while I wouldn't say that I make decisions about whose work I find aesthetically pleasing based on their numbers of social media platforms, it is something that I need to present to the publisher, well, to Rizzoli. They'll say, if these are the 100 people in your book, can you give us a spreadsheet of all their platforms and how many followers they have? And what ends up happening, and certainly in my young designer book, the number was, in the vicinity of 1 million followers.
Right.
For the course of 50 people. And so then the publishing house says, well, the author may not be that large a presence on social media platforms. All the people he's talking about are, and they'll promote the book. And that is frankly one of the things I ask people when they get involved in my projects, is to say, can you join me when it's published, and will you be willing to work with me to make sure the word gets out about this book?
Oh, that's fantastic. And that should be the way that collaborations like this work, I think. And I'll tell you, I've told many of the community, because I believe interior design community is not my community. I believe it's all of our community. I mean, that's what makes it special. So I have said numerous times to our members that utilize interior design community as part of your social following. If you tell me that, you need me to post something about, something that you're doing, I'm going to do it most likely, because it's really about the designers for me, and it's about the community that we've built together, these last 10 years. So
it's one of the reasons I agreed to do this, because I mean, I think it's a secretive business, the publishing thing, and there's so many sort of nebulous concepts floating out in the air about how to get it done. And the truth being honest, I'm an open book in talking about how this happens, because it's not only me being successful when I do these books, it empowers other people to be successful.
I love that, because I think that is the problem. In this industry, there are a lot of secrets, and people don't know exactly how that functions. So if you got to the point where you're like, I have this great idea, I think this would be a big seller for a book. You write a treatment, and you would want to try to find an agent first before you bring that to a publisher. Obviously, like there's usually that gets shopped around as an idea.
Right.
Do you suggest in that early stages they work with someone like you too, so that they're able to position it correctly? Someone who has experience like you do.
Well, I'm open to doing that. And that's what I have been doing in tandem with producing my books, is talking with people about how to put a proposal together, what that looks like in a way that might attract either an agent first, or some people definitely go directly to publishing houses. I know that Rizzoli has their finger on the pulse of what's going on in the community, and they're always looking at people who's are up and coming and whose work they appreciate. And then they may decide to go directly to a client, but that's probably lesser than and getting some of the legwork done yourself. I mean, I ask people about, how does your aesthetic get wrapped into a theme? Is it minimalism, or is it maximalism, or is it contemporary? Is it traditional? Is it some sort of, first identify who you really are as a designer and what your work represents, and then you really have to come up with a theme for a book, and explore that in writing to make sure that the publishing house and the agent or the agent understand who you are, in addition to what they see in images of your work. And then, sort of got to work out all the details. I think as a rule, 10 projects is the minimum for a book. So, is it too early in your career to be doing that? I worked recently with a designer who several years ago brought a proposal idea to me. And I said, you have 7 really great projects and 3 that seem like the lesser stepsisters. And I don't mean any judgment by that. It's just thinking about the caliber of your work and how it's grown over the course of time. You might not want to have these other projects in there. And so he stepped back and spent a few more years finishing a couple projects, which then he got photographed, which is another major piece. And then he attracted an agent. And then his agent, who I happen to know, shopped it out to 6 or 7 publishing houses, and they settled on one.
Oh, wow. I can imagine, and that's invaluable advice. Doing it too early could mean the difference between a book that does very well and a book that doesn't. So,
Right.
I mean, it's really important to hear from your point of view. Now, you did things very differently in that you spoke to so many designers and in that you were so connected. Do you find that the people that you're working with are people that are doing books based on their own projects, or are they trying to work with other designers as well?
I know a couple people who do compilation books, survey books like I do, and I don't know for sure, probably work in the same vein I do. When a designer is going to do a book, it sort of comes down to one of 2 ideas. It's either a monograph or a theme book. So I think theme books are probably more related to the work I do. A monograph, which is just you and let's say 10 projects of your work, and there are 12 spreads of each one of those projects, and it's a 256-page book. That's one thing. And a publishing house there are publishing houses, obviously, like Rizzoli and Vendome and Monticelli, who do these kinds of books. They're looking at your platform and the quality of your work to make a decision about whether they're going to publish it. And that's a little steeper hill to climb than a theme book. Because if you're going to do a book like I did about maximalism, and maybe it's your work and it's several other people's work, and the book is about empowering an audience of readers to see how you do this work, then it's a slightly easier lift when it comes to publishing houses, because they don't see it as only a single designer who's going to be able to promote this unless you have a big platform.
Right.
It's more as a theme book, it empowers an audience to make decisions about how they might decorate their homes. And that's sort of what I do, is I'm trying to get this to, the Midwest and the Southwest. And, I'm looking for people to be able to read my books and glean information that will empower them about how they decorate.
Yes, yes.
But
And how about copyright for that? I'm just curious. You have 100 different designers you're learning from. You get a bunch of images. Those images most likely aren't owned by the designer themselves. How did that work for you? How did you manage that?
Interesting question, because designers assume they have the rights to use the images from photographers in other projects. And while it's been my experience over time that most photographers allow for the work to be seen on websites, and sometimes license the work to be able to be on social media platforms if they've been tagged and recognized. As a rule, and I would say this is 95% of the time, photographers do not automatically grant rights to be published in a book. That's my job, is when I identify a designer, I don't know, Stephen Gambrell, right, in New York, and I know that Eric Pisecki is his photographer as a rule. I need to work with Eric once I identify the images that I've chosen in the photo editing process. I have to go back to Eric and then say, this is the book I'm doing. It's published by Rizzoli. I'm using your images for Stephen and 6 other designers, and in total, I need 30 images. What's the very best you can do with me for me to purchase the image rights? And Rizzoli and other publishing houses give you an image rights budget. So in addition to an advance against sales for my books, they give me a number to say, this is the number you have to work with to secure all the image rights for the book. And luckily at this point, 6 books in, I have relationships with almost everyone in the photography world that I can say, okay, this is what I'm doing next. And people are pretty easygoing, but it's a curious thing because designers automatically think because a photographer took the images of my work, then I can use them in the book. And it's very often surprising that they can't. Now,
Right.
caveat there, if a photographer works exclusively with a designer, and there's one designer I'm working with and developing a proposal now, and she has always used exactly the same photographer. That's an easier conversation because on the cover of the book, you can say principal photography by and list the photographer's name. And then that's an incentive for them to want to sell you the image rights and say it's 115 pictures or 120 pictures, where they might typically have paid $200 an image to license it. The photographer may say, I'm happy to give it to you at 100 or 50, depending on how eager they are to advance their careers.
Right. Would you suggest, I won't make you suggest this. I'll suggest this is that, that designers probably should have an agreement with their photographers and make sure that the contracts that they're signing give them more rights, and that they also, that they also kind of foresee this a little bit too. I mean, careers are long and you may choose to do something like this down the road, and think about that even when you're starting out, what you want that photography contract to look like, because it's a negotiation. A contract is a negotiation, and you should absolutely be negotiating for the rights that you need to do the things you want to do in your career, I think.
I also wanted to point out that as a designer, there's a little bit of ambiguity selecting the photographer. I think now that with social media, we see the portfolios, and the photographers are very savvy in showcasing the top talent and the best shoots, and they're traveling here and they're traveling there, and it garners a little bit of respect when you see someone who's going across the country to do photo shoots for A-list designers, if you will. But when you're starting off and you're starting your portfolio and you get that blue whale of a project and you know that this is something special, how can we scrutinize which photographer we should actually talk to and build that relationship with out of a pool of a ton of people that we see on social media? Because sometimes I think that decision is made based on budget and what you allowed for the budget because you weren't aware of how much good photography costs. And what do we look for in good photography, right? That's going to qualify for a book you would work with, Carl.
It's a very interesting thing to talk about how photography has shifted over the course of my 40 years in design. There was a time in Paige Rentz's reign at Architectural Digest where she chose the photographers. They got the projects. The images were owned by Condé Nast, and you'd have to wrangle with them to get image rights, which was a much steeper hill to climb. Over the course of the world of social media and how things have changed, there are photographers now who work to establish a relationship. There's one in particular, that a woman designer who always has one photographer produce her projects, and she has a relationship with him and a contract such that she can use those images anywhere she wants. Even if Architectural Digest were to come in and say, we'd rather have Douglas Friedman for example, photograph the project, she still hires her photographer separately. The images may look very similar, but she owns the rights to them. And, it's my opinion, Lori, to answer your question, that if you know a young photographer who's up and coming and you like their work and you're a young designer up and coming, I would seek that person out and say, if I could make an arrangement with you to exclusively photograph my work over the course of time and I end up doing a book, how would you feel about us working together on that? it's not the old days where a photographer is assigned and somebody goes and photographs it, and then you have to fight to get image rights. You can manage this in very different ways.
Yes, we're trying to compile a list of photographers that are willing to agree to those terms, and that we would be able to refer designers to. But I also suggest, just because I think it would be interesting for them to reach out to someone like you too, because you would be a valuable resource about, which photographers are easier probably to work with regarding this matter than most people. So I would think that you would be an excellent resource for a designer who's thinking about a strategy long term to come to you and ask these questions. Who should I be working with?
And geographically also, it's sort of
Sure.
like, if you happen to be in the upper Midwest, I know a great photographer there. But if you're in New York and you want to work here, I know a photographer here. And I see people in Los Angeles, I see people in Dallas. And I know that these photographers are eager, especially the young ones who are talented, to establish working relationships that transcend time, because
Yes.
it's obviously building a revenue stream for them by establishing relationships with designers.
Now, do you have part of your, when you start the process of laying out what the book will look like, and you're really thinking, how long from the very beginning of that process of getting into the writing and sourcing it does it actually take to finish? What does that normally look like for you?
So my books are almost unilaterally 2 years, and that's a self-imposed deadline. Rizzoli will say when I have a new idea, and I'm just pitched another book to them to start after the one I'm finishing, and it's a go, but it's a garden book. And so we're going to need 3 spring seasons to be able to complete photography. So that one's a 3-year project. But I would say, as a rule, if the photography already exists, from the minute you say, okay, I'm going to do this, and put my pen to paper and producing a proposal, attracting a literary agent, and then getting it to a publishing house, get them to sign off, you get the contract, you have, especially if all the photography is done, it's 2 years for sure. You might, and one young designer I'm working with now has 2 projects that are not complete yet. And so I've said, I think we need to be 2 years to 2.5 years, because I don't want you to rush finishing this project and us photograph it before you're absolutely ready. And if you go to a publishing house and say, these are the scouting shots I've taken with my iPhone, and there are 24 of those, I want to include this project in the book, it will complete in this coming summer, then a publishing house will say, okay, we'll wait. And we'll still move ahead with a contract, but it will take a little longer than 2 years. But again, as a rule, for me, it's 2 years. I sign the contract and it's out 2 years later.
Okay. And then after that process, I'm assuming, do a lot of promotion. And what does that look like?
Yeah, what does that look like? Going back again to 40 years ago, when publishing houses had big budgets to put promotions on, it was a different story. This is a sort of a important conversation to have with designers who are thinking about a book, because while publishing houses, mine in particular, Rizzoli, has an apparatus and people there who really support you, the work is by and large yours to figure out how you're going to do it. What venues, what industry events? Are you going to the San Francisco Art and Antiques Fair? Are you going to High Point? Are you going to Atlanta? You've got to sort of identify those yourself. A publishing house, Rizzoli in particular, will connect me to all the people I need to know. Paper City Magazine in Dallas and Houston and Texas Design Week, they connected me with the people there to be able to begin to work on how I might come and promote a book. And often the venue, Texas Design Week in particular, will pay to get you there and pay to keep you there for 2 nights in a lovely hotel, right? But the legwork is yours to do, right? And that's a surprise to some people, because they think, oh, I finished the book and the publishing house is going to do all this work for me. And they do, again, a good amount of work in helping me figure it out, but you have to be prepared to advance that yourself. And so a young designer who has a public relations firm that I'm working with now, we're meeting once every 2 weeks to talk about where this young designer, when the book comes out, will go and where she wants to promote and all that, but it's work that a PR firm does, adjunct to the public relations arm of a publishing house.
Right, right. And that can be kind of extensive. I mean, do you try to also hit, directly with bookstores that are popular? Do you do any of that kind of thing?
Yeah, when a book comes out, there's a 24 interior design bookstores that really specialize in interior design. When my last book, More is More is More, came out, we held the book party at Rizzoli because obviously they're the publishing house and it's a bookstore that specializes in those kinds of books. And it was a big success. We sold out all the books that were there. And of course, I have an audience of people that I can speak to say, come to the party. But that's legwork that, going back to social media platforms and followers, that's a part of it, right? It's like if you build a platform, then on the day that you say, I'm going to be at this bookstore in Los Angeles promoting my book, you can speak to those people on your social media following and get them there to the book party.
Right, right, right. And I think that that's a neat process, but it must be an extensive process. I mean, how long does that take I mean, you're talking about multiple shows, multiple bookstores. I mean, is that another year after the book is out?
You're doing that work in tandem in theory, right? So you're
Yes.
well into your book and you understand what it really is beginning to look like. It's materialized. You've got to be thinking in tandem about where it is that I'm going to go to promote this. One of the pieces for me, because I have so many people involved in the projects, is then I can say to Martin Bullard in Los Angeles, for example, you're in this book and I'd love your help. And so we have a little thing at his store and he brings his audience of people in to buy the book.
Right.
So that's another piece. And designers can do that in a monograph by talking to the industry partners they're working with, their vendors. So if Kohler features in, or a particular tile company or a carpet manufacturer features in your projects, then you might want to be reaching out to them, Beauvais Carpets, for example, in New York, who you use regularly in your projects, and say, would you be willing to host a book party for me? Of course they're going to, because the audience of people who are coming to that party are fellow designers and the public who are interested in high-end design.
Right.
So,
Oh my gosh, that is
You have to
really,
have that all organized, probably
that's
even
really
before the
smart.
books rolled out, so you know the plan, right?
long before, because in theory, the day
Yeah.
September 24th, the book comes out, right? You want a party on September 25th, right? And so you've
Right.
got to think that through way back in advance. But it's sort of like if you give the thought to this and you do some legwork, and of course you might have help in doing that, because I mean, if you're designing houses, I don't know how much time you have for this project to get a book going, but hopefully you have some assistance in your office and or public relations firm to help you with that. But it's important to have that all figured out.
Yeah. Yeah. I would assume that that would be very tricky too. And a lot of time and if you're a working designer and you're trying to take the time to write the book, and then you're also taking the time to publish the book, and promote the book, that's an extreme undertaking if you're also working on projects. How is your young designer handling that pressure?
Well, again, this young woman who I'm working with has a PR team, and she's pretty successful. So
Sure.
she's in her early 40s. She's doing very well. You just have to figure it out, and it's complicated. But as we were just talking about vendors, every designer has a group of vendors they go back to again and again. Maybe it's Rogers and Gothic and it's your go-to textile house, or Clarence House, or whoever it is, tile, wood, cabinetry, all of those sorts of things, hardware. If you have a list of those people, that's where you start with the book launch event, right?
Right.
Who has the biggest showroom? Who might have a budget to support me to be able to do this? And then you start there.
Right. That is really, really smart. And that actually does translate, separately to photography too, because I do know designers who have gotten the brands to, once they have that, Michael, you were just talking about that level up project, and they know they need really great photography, they need really great styling, and it's going to cost them $10,000-$15,000. Sometimes what you do is also work with the brands that helped you create that product because they want that imagery as well. So sometimes there's a deal to be made with those brands when that happens too. And it's this little out of the box thinking that can sometimes get these deals done. So.
And, you know, there are two pieces to licensing imagery, and this is important in this conversation about engaging vendors. You have two pieces. You have to secure world rights for the book publication ad infinitum. So if this book turns out to be a hit and it goes on in publication ad infinitum, a photographer signs off on a specific amount of money for the image to be produced in the book. The second piece is promotional. So you also have to ask a photographer if they'll allow the use for promotional work for the book, so it can appear in the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal or Vogue or Elle Decor or Architectural Digest. So you get them to sign off on that. And many photographers these days allow that to happen. There are some who play closer to the vest with regard to allowing for promotional use. And those are people who are typically very, very established and they're okay with it. But then when you have those promotional image rights and there's a Clarence House textile in it, then you can be tagging Clarence House, gives them an opportunity to cross tag it and put your content out on their own feed, which further advances the book.
Right.
How much of this is kind of like royalty based? Is that for the photographer, when you're saying they're signing off on it, does it ever happen, or have you come across it in your history where they're like, well, I'd like to keep making money if this keeps getting published in other countries or whatever, or they just want the notoriety and the prestige of being in this bestseller?
I have not come across a publishing house yet, and I have worked with half a dozen of them now, who would allow a photographer to continue to gain royalty from the book continuing to sell. Interior Design Masterclass, my book was printed in Chinese. It's in the 14th printing in the United States. It continues to sell. But everybody and every photographer in that book signed off on ad infinitum world rights to that book. So
It's a standard.
it is standard.
Okay.
And I mean, I want everybody to be paid for the work they do fairly.
Sure.
Right? So if you've paid a photographer $10,000 to photograph your project, and then a writer like me approaches that photographer to say, I'd like to use some of my images in this book, it's money above what they made to photograph it. They obviously own the image rights. They're the artist, and they should be paid. But I don't know that a publisher, let me rephrase, Rizzoli would not say that's okay.
Right.
We need to know what the number is today. You have a budget to be able to purchase the image rights. Once we're done, it's signed. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. So let's talk a little bit about the money aspect of all of this. Is there an advance when you first, I mean, it takes 2 years. So I'm assuming that you get paid something up front and then you're also participating in earnings after.
So I'll just talk about my experience. And
Sure. Sure.
So Rizzoli came up with an advance for me for my first book with them, which was less than I subsequently make, which is nice to know. But the advance you get is an advance on the sales of the book and your percentage of the gross sales once you beat it. So, for example, this is just a random number. They give you $20,000 to edit as an advance to work on the book, and your percentage on it is 18.5% of the gross sale of the book. So it's $25 at not the gross sale, the net sale. So they're offering it to Amazon for $25. The net price is $50. And Amazon's making double. I'm going in the weeds. I'll back up. So if you get $20,000, you have that money and only that money until you make back that amount of money in the percentage you make on the book. So once you
It's like a draw.
Yeah, once you draw the $20,000 down in sales, then you get a royalty, and that's also organized in the contract of the book.
Okay. Yes.
Let me give you round numbers and make it easier. $20,000 is the advance. You get 20% of the $25 book sales, so that's $5.
Right.
So you have to sell for every book. You have to sell enough books to make the 20,000 back at $5
And
a
then you
book.
get $5
Then you
extra. Then you can
After that,
participate.
once a year, I get a royalty check from the publishing house because they sold this many more books, and it comes in an elaborate spreadsheet.
Oh,
Uh,
wow. Yeah.
Some publishing houses, as I said, offer photography rights budgets. So there's that in addition to the advance. So say they gave you $20,000 for the book, $20,000 to purchase image rights. Now you have $40,000. You would use that money as a designer to offset the cost of producing the book. First, obviously, photography rights. You're going to pay that to the photographers to be able to license the images, both for world rights of the published book and for promotional use across social platforms and media. The other $20,000 you need to use to do everything else, that being hire a writer, a public relations firm that's going to help you manage this once it's out, and a project manager. And for me, that's sort of a dual role. I write the text for people's books, and then I project manage it. And I come up with a number that I think is fair to be able to do that work for a designer. It often costs more, I'd say, than the advance and the photography rights. And it depends on the publishing house, your platform. If you have 250,000 Instagram followers and you're super active on it and you're shooting the reels out twice a day, and you have all this engagement, a publishing house is going to see that as an opportunity to leverage your platform, and they would offer you more in an advance to offset your costs because they already know you're a proven track record out there in the world of media.
Right. Right.
There's a better chance of the ROI with the influencer. Sure. I just wanted to point out that when you were saying all that about hiring the personnel, the professional, consultants that are, obviously needed for a publication like in one of these books, how does one go about finding, the right people, or to know that they're making the right choices, spending the right amount of money for professionals that they've never worked with before? Is that something you offer help with, Carl?
I do. Yeah, people come to me there's a photographer in the Midwest I'm working with right now who had an idea for a book about the area's aesthetics. So he hired me to work on the proposal first and what was necessary to make that happen. And I've actually included his work in some of my books. He already knew that there was he knew who I was. It's a tricky thing, right? Another young designer who contacted me a few weeks ago and who I had a Zoom call with just to sort of feel out the situation, had hired someone to help her put the proposal together, who was sort of evasive with regard to what the costs were and sort of, well, we'll start here and then we'll see what happens there. You've got to be really clear at the beginning.
Yes.
This would be my advice to a designer. It's sort of like, does the person you're going to work with to help you produce this have experience? Have a couple meetings with them to see how you really feel about their work. Ask for recommendations for other people they've worked with already, right? So that, I'm happy to give you a list of the people I've worked with and have you reach out to them to say, what was your experience working with Carl? I think and not just me, anybody you were going to work with, you'd want to do this, legwork to figure out exactly whether or not you feel like there's a simpatico, if you feel comfortable, if you feel like this is going to be an easy experience.
Right. I mean, it's a 2-year process. So you have to, I mean, it's just, I'm going to compare it to hiring an interior designer.
Exactly.
You want to make sure you're reading the reviews and know what you're getting yourself into, and you have compatibility with the person, your team that you're putting together, for sure. And it's got to be a very stressful situation, certainly at the end of the process when you're reaching that deadline.
Yeah, the deadlines are, I mean, I have spreadsheets and Google notes and Evernote and all the stuff that helps me get organized. That's a pivotal piece to be organized. And thinking about the money, I think like you could give a really easy round number of $100,000 before this is all said and done, that you've invested in making this thing happen. And then you have this book in your hand, right?
Right.
And what I try to help people to see is that, I mean, I'm not an interior designer. I was a textile designer. But if you have a clear understanding of your margins over the course of projects and you know what it is that you're netting on each job, and you have so many jobs going on at the same time, you balance the $100,000 number over the course of what you might make in the 3, 4, 7 projects you will get because you have this book in your hand. It's a very powerful business tool to hand somebody a monograph of your work and say, oh, by the way, here's my book, and sign it to them, right? And then they have this opportunity to see it, and they've probably seen your work before on social platforms, but there's something transformational about having a book in one's hand to say, this person represents authority, this person represents expertise, success.
Right, right. And I'm sure that there are a lot of the designers that you've worked with in the past that have presented your book to their clients just to show them that I'm a serious designer. I'm at that level.
It is true. Especially the young designer book I produced. Many people have used it to say, here's Rizzoli and Carl Dellatore saying that I'm one of the 50 people that's important in the future of design today. And I don't know, I'm not that important on some, I don't want to sound like I'm that important, right? It's just that this
I think you're important.
Yeah.
I think your opinion matters a lot, actually.
Well, I've been at it, I've been
Yes.
again in New York for 40 years working in this industry, and I've seen a lot of things happen and change, and that I land in this position seems to make sense on some level.
I think so too. And I think that you put yourself in this position too. So, I mean, it's sometimes that is what it takes. And sometimes I think that that's another misconception with designers is they don't know that at a certain point in your career, it's about, reaching out and grabbing for the success that you want, reaching and making those connections with the people that will get you there, and putting it out there, volunteering yourself into that world so that you are able to go further. And I think that a lot of people wait for it to happen to them. They want that someone to come and say, you should write a book here, and it's not usually that's not the case. It's they have to decide that that's not, this is the next step. Correct?
Agreed.
Yeah. So would you say it is much easier to write your own books, or is it easier to work with people writing a book? Which one is?
Well, it depends on who you are, I guess, right? At the end of the day, Bunny Williams, for example, writes her own books. Charlotte Moss writes her own books. When I ask them to get involved in a project, they'll say, what are the parameters? 400, 700 words, whatever it is. And what's the subject matter? And then I walk away because they're, serious about the writing and they're actually quite good. Alexa Hampton, also an excellent writer. Then there are designers I work with who obviously should remain nameless, who aren't such great writers. Right. And I think you have to do some soul searching to see whether or not you really have the skill to be able to write down on paper an articulation of what you've done in a space. Right. And if you don't, if you're honest with yourself and that's not your skill, then you hire a writer. Recently, this obviously the AI thing has sort of taken over.
Yes,
right?
I was going to ask you that next.
Yeah. And so, I'm working on this book called 100 Rooms, and it's practical advice for a larger community about 100 different subjects, carpets, wallpaper. Anyway, several of the designers who are involved in the project asked me whether it would be okay to use ChatGPT to come up with their text. And my response is, it's a business tool like any other business tool you use. So if you have an accounting software program or a project management software and you use it, to some extent it's helpful, right? But at the end of the day, you have to make it your own.
Right.
And so one designer in particular had the prompt into ChatGPT and wrote his essay, and he sent it to me to just say, what do you think of this? And, obviously there's tons of information on the internet that you can cull to have these software programs write something for you. But It's sort of formulaic in a way. There are two adjectives in front of something, and then there's a introduction paragraph, and then most often it's in conclusion as the final paragraph. And that might give you an outline, but you need to make it your own.
You do. And on not just from that level, but ChatGPT writing has been ruled at this point that it's not you cannot copyright it because it is not your writing. So you do need to make it your own. I mean, I think it's a great tool too for people who are certainly in that blog space trying to do local SEO, local, promotion of their designers aren't always writers, and they certainly are so overworked. They don't have time to sit and write a blog every week, but they need to for the SEO for their website. And so it's common for me to suggest that they start with it and then try to formulate your own words in there, at least 200 words. That's kind of my general, if it's 200 of your own words, then it's yours.
There's
Google
also
will say
the
it's yours.
Brainstorming perspective, it's a great tool,
Oh,
right?
sure.
Yeah, I mean, when you say we're overworked, that's, it's an understatement as designers, but I think from that creative space, sometimes you have a couple facets that you want to put into a blog or a writing, and you spit that into Chat GPT, and then you're like, okay, here's the foundation. Now let me mold this, right? So
Right.
that's where the integrity comes in as, being a person of ethical value in your craft. I think that's important to note.
You can also write something yourself and have it be, let's say, rather fractured, that it's not sort of been organized, and input your
Yes.
time to it and say, please organize and synthesize this text. And in that way, you get the help of artificial intelligence. And then obviously there's a program called Grammarly Premium. I don't know if you
Yep,
know
I
of it.
have it.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
Heard of that one. I forget what it is though.
yeah, so as a writer, it's a copy editor. It's an artificial intelligent copy editor. So it will tell me where the period doesn't belong, or the colon, it should be a semicolon, or perhaps this word is lofty and given your audience, you want to make it a softer word. I would readily admit I use it all the time. I mean, I think most writers are using Grammarly Premium at this point because it's taking over that piece, that final polish piece. I
Right.
don't use it to write it, but it polishes my text.
Sure. And I'll give you another tip that I picked up on TikTok the other day that I think is really interesting. But even now, so we're doing this Zoom, and I have an AI summary that's going to be coming out. But what you can do is Google's Gemini, which used to be their Bard, you can put in a YouTube video. And so I could put this onto YouTube, and I can say, write me a transcription of this interview. And then you can take that and put that into ChatGPT and have them organize it, because Gemini's not that great at organizing it. And sometimes the words are going to be incorrect, and you can tell ChatGPT to organize it and also replace words that you think that it got incorrect and put it in some sort of fashion. So from your perspective, you could also interview some of your designers that you're working with, and you could take those interviews, even as a private video, throw them into a transcription, and then get a great summary. And then you can have it summarized down to make a beautiful version of kind of what was said in the interview. So you can write from there and pull the good quotes, and
You learn something.
fascinating.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, I'm always interested in how to use these technologies so that we can be more productive, because there's so many wonderful ideas out there. There's so much creativity still to be had, but harnessing the tools in a way that we can actually use them, to make our lives a little bit easier is good. But it should never replace real writing, because I would much rather read real writing. We have a designer friend, I believe in common, who has switched careers, and she is now doing voiceover work, and she does a lot of she does audiobooks, and she goes to audiobook conferences, and they're very afraid of AI because of how our voices can be mimicked now with AI. So it's fascinating to me to use the tools, but certainly, You know, there has to be some of you in there, I think, because
Yeah.
it is very formulaic. I mean, it doesn't look like good writing always.
No, it doesn't. The buzzword for me in all of this is nuance, because what you get from artificial intelligence writing platforms is not nuanced. It's not your personality. A word that I would never use, I don't know, would kind of show up in a document from ChatGPT, and I have to take it out, obviously, because it's not a word I would use, or it's not the tenor of what I'm trying to communicate. And I have investigated it for myself. And well, I'm a writer, so I don't really need it, but I have input things to say, can you organize this? And there's some value.
Right, right. But I love that you're not against it entirely. Some writers definitely are.
We don't really have a choice, do we? At this
No.
point, the box is open, and either you can lament something because it might take work away from you, or you can attempt to join it in a way that advances your work in a better way.
Yes, yes.
Find a way to use the tool.
Yeah. Well, I think that's really exciting for a designer who's a little bit intimidated by the process, at least that there is something that could maybe get that something on paper for you to even start in that direction. Because I think the writing part has to be, for an interior designer, has to be the most intimidating part of a book, because they're not writers. You know, I mean, some of them are very good, but that's not what they're educated in doing. So it's got to be an intimidating part of the process, I would think.
Yeah, it is.
Now, what does the pressure feel like of you know, not just getting that final stage of getting the book done, but the expectation that of what the sales might be? I mean, you're much more comfortable with that now, I'm assuming, but do you still feel that?
You know, and I look at my royalty statement every June and say, did I do a good enough job? Right. I suppose there's that. Um, I don't spend a whole lot of time thinking about while I'm working on a project, whether or not it's going to sell. What I have to do is pay attention to my soul, my heart, and my interest in design, and choose images, choose designers, fit these pieces together. When it comes out, if it's not doing well or it hasn't done well, you can always work to try to figure out how to leverage the content, which, by the way, if you're an interior designer and you've written a book or had someone write a book for you, you own the copyright to all the text. So let's say, for example, you're not a writer, but you've worked with someone who's written your book and all the captions in the book have been written. You can utilize those captions verbatim in social media posts. So you don't have to go back and figure out how I'm going to write about this room. Use the caption. Or if you've written a chapter about pattern, for example, you can utilize any of that text in the future and then say it's from the book, whatever the name of your book is, right?
Right,
And so
right.
using that to constantly refer back to your book. This young man whose book I just finished, I told his social media person who lives in the UK to utilize the text in a way in the book as much as he could. So he's created these memes on what is actually the end papers of the book and to start promoting them on social media. And it's just quotes from the book.
I love
But
that.
yeah, you have to figure these things out. And once you've produced it, it's yours. And
Well,
if
you
you
know,
have
I love a good meme, so
yes.
you had me a meme.
Me too. Yeah, for sure. Laura, you and I had spoken about that before, about interior designers sometimes feel that they put something out there into the internet and they get likes or they get comments and they're almost afraid to use it again or to use it in a different light. And that content is gold, as you know, Carl, what you're just
Yeah.
alluded to. It's important for us to realize that we can repackage and repurpose these things and recycle them back into our feeds because we paid for that. Like, keep using it. It's not going to hurt. You don't know who the next person is that's going to see that content.
Right. And that, more importantly, even though you've seen it several times, you have to remember that the audience that you have on, like for me on Instagram, we just hit 104,000 followers. So we, for interior design community, I could post at 8 a.m. in the morning and I will have a very different audience at 9 o'clock in the morning, never mind a year from now. there might
Abs-
be a whole new audience a year from now. So, or a
Sure.
month from now. So I think that, we tend to grow, I think at a rate of like, I don't know, around, 2,500 or so a month, or 3,000 a month or something like that. But so it's always new. You're always growing. You're always, there, you have a new, some people are on Instagram today and they're not on Instagram tomorrow. And you have to remember that your audience isn't always there. So those little reminders, you feel like you're being repetitive, but you're not, because they're not seeing every single thing you do. And they're not, you can talk about it in a different light over and over again. And people, I didn't even know you wrote a book. You know what I mean? Like, I'm sure you've heard that a million times. I didn't know you wrote books. You're like, what do you mean?
No, and I know one designer in particular who has a actual spreadsheet of rotation schedule for the posts that go up. So if you knew you posted it
Smart.
months ago on January 1st, it goes up again on July the 1st. And
Right.
as you add content to it, you can interject it into the spreadsheet. And so then you're not constantly trying to figure out what goes up tomorrow.
Right. And if you're an Instagram, I'll give you a tip. If they're an Instagram or Facebook is your jam, mostly, Creator Studio that's a Facebook tool in your own business, Meta Business Suite tools is free. And that you can do scheduling of stories, feed, Instagram posts, Facebook posts for free. You can schedule that out for the whole month. It takes probably about an hour and a half, 2 hours to do that. But once you got your images in there too, in your file, you can reuse those images whenever you want. It's easier to repost it and add different captions, add different hashtags, put the links in your bio, that kind of thing. Do you put links in your bio for every book so that you can remember?
Yes. When I'm promoting a book, my Instagram URL on the homepage is always well, I shouldn't say, publishers don't want you to only point to Amazon, which is
Right.
a whole, right? They prefer you to point to a blog post that lists 3 or 4 publishing houses, Barnes and Noble certainly, and then Rizzoli themselves, obviously, and then maybe 1 or 2 small art house publishers or distributors, because we're not always trying to send everybody to Amazon to buy something.
Sure. It's so tricky with multiple links, but now Instagram does let you put many links up in your profile. So if they wanted to kind of have their own built-in link tree, so you were able to put all of the different links. You could put the direct Amazon, you can put all, you can have, here's this book, here's, if you want to just add more, I guess. Well, thank you so much, Carl. I really appreciated your time. Let everyone know where they can find your books, please.
So my books are all published by Rizzoli. You can get them on Amazon, Rizzoli's website, Barnes and Noble. Those are the big ones. You can find me on Instagram at Carl Dellatore. It's my name. Easy to find me there. And my website is carldellatore.com. That's not so hard to find either. If you want to talk about some book project, I'm happy to engage.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. Thank you, Michael, too.
Thank you, Carl. Pleasure meeting you. I appreciate it.
Pleasure to meet you too. Thank you. I'll look forward
to it later.
Thank you.